Henry Whitmore had it all: wealth, status, and a future set by the elite. His wedding was supposed to be a perfect celebration, a spectacle of tradition and power. But when the father of the bride, a simple craftsman, delivered an unexpected gift, the entire room froze. What could be inside that modest package that made even the wealthiest of them question what they really owned? What the Whitmores didn't know was that the gift held a secret that could destroy the legacy they had spent generations building. Stay with me until the end of this video, because what happens after this revelation changes everything. And now tell me, where are you watching from today? I'd love to know. If you're enjoying this story, leave a comment and make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely won't want to miss. She thought she was making a sacrifice to save her family, but what if she was the one being deceived? Sienna Brooks, a struggling medical student, had no choice but to marry a wealthy but dying billionaire in exchange for financial security. It was supposed to be nothing more than a contract, a desperate deal to protect the people she loved. But just 1 week after the wedding, she uncovers a truth that shatters everything she believed. A secret so shocking that it threatens to unravel. The fragile connection she never expected to form. What will Sienna do when she realizes the man she thought was fading away might have been lying all along? And more importantly, was it all just a transaction, or did something real emerge from the deception? Stay with us until the end to uncover the truth behind this emotional and unexpected journey. I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying this story, drop a comment below and make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Sienna Brooks rushed through the corridors of the university, her mind racing as fast as her feet. The clock on the wall seemed to mock her, ticking away precious seconds that slipped through her fingers like sand. She clutched her textbooks tightly against her chest, the weight of her responsibilities pressing down on her shoulders. Today was a particularly chaotic day, one where she had to juggle her classes, study for an impending exam, and work a shift at the diner to help make ends meet. As she entered the lecture hall, she felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. The professor droned on about complex medical theories, but Sienna's focus drifted. Her thoughts were consumed by her family's struggles. Her mother had been bedridden for months, battling an illness that seemed to sap the joy from their once vibrant lives, and her younger siblings, Emily and Jake, depended on her for everything, from meals to emotional support. "Hey, Sienna," called a friend, Sarah, breaking through her reverie. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Sienna forced a smile, though it felt brittle. "I'm fine, just a lot on my plate. You know how it is." She glanced at her phone. Seeing a missed call from home, her heart sank. "Is it about your mom?" Sarah asked, concern etched on her face. "Yeah," Sienna admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how much longer we can manage like this. Have you thought about talking to someone, maybe a counselor or—" "No, I can't," Sienna interrupted, shaking her head. "I can't burden anyone else with my problems. I just need to get through this semester." The bell rang, signaling the end of the class. Sienna gathered her things, grateful for the distraction of the bustling students around her. She needed to keep moving, keep pushing forward. As she navigated the crowded hallway, her thoughts shifted to the notice she had received earlier that week. A warning of eviction. The landlord was tired of waiting for rent that was already overdue. She couldn't let her family end up on the streets. After a long day filled with classes and a grueling shift at the diner, Sienna finally returned home, exhausted. The modest apartment felt heavy with silence as she stepped inside, the faint smell of disinfectant lingering in the air. She found her mother in bed, her frail figure barely rising above the covers, while Jake and Emily were huddled on the couch, their eyes glued to a cartoon. "Hey, guys," Sienna said, forcing a cheerful tone. "Did you eat dinner?" "Mom said we had to wait for you," Jake piped up, his small face lighting up with a smile. Sienna's heart twisted at the sight of her mother's tired eyes. "I'm sorry, I'm really sorry. I'll make us something quick." As she headed toward the kitchen, she felt a wave of despair wash over her. She was only 22, yet she felt the weight of the world on her shoulders. The bills piled up, and her mother's condition continued to worsen. Sienna's mind raced as she prepared a simple meal, her thoughts spiraling into a dark abyss of worry. Just then, the doorbell rang, echoing through the quiet space. Sienna wiped her hands on a dish towel and opened the door, revealing her uncle, Marvin, a man with a rugged charm and an air of practicality that often came off as harshness. "Sienna," he said, his voice gruff yet warm. "How are you holding up?" "Uncle Marvin," she replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's been challenging." He stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the small apartment. "I can see that. I've heard about your mother. How are the kids doing?" "They're okay," Sienna said, though she knew it was a lie. "Just trying to keep things normal for them." Marvin's expression turned serious. "Listen, I came here to talk to you about something. Something that might help." Sienna's heart raced at his tone. "What is it?" He shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his hair. "I know things are tough right now. I've been speaking with someone, a friend of mine. He's in a position to help you." "What do you mean?" Sienna asked, confusion and apprehension swirling inside her. "He's a billionaire, Alexander Whitmore. He's looking for a marriage of convenience. A way to secure his future, and in return, he can help you and your family." Sienna stared at him, disbelief creeping in. "You want me to marry a stranger, an old man, just for money?" "It's not just about money, Sienna. This is about security for your family," Marvin insisted. "I know it sounds crazy, but think about it. You could keep a roof over their heads, provide for them. It's not like you're losing anything. You're already what?" "Desperate," Sienna snapped, her voice rising. "I'm not going to sell myself, Uncle Marvin. This isn't some fairy tale. I'm not saying it is, but you need to think about your family. Your mother. She needs treatment. The kids need stability. This could solve everything." Marvin's voice softened, desperation seeping through. Sienna felt her heart racing as she absorbed his words. "And what if I say no? What then? We just end up on the streets?" Marvin sighed, running a hand over his face. "I don't know, Sienna. I just know that time is running out. This man has resources. He can make sure you and your family are taken care of. You don't have to love him. It's just a contract." "Contract or not, it's still marriage," she argued, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. "I can't just do that." "Why not? You've sacrificed so much already. Think of it as one more sacrifice for your family. You can handle it." Sienna closed her eyes, the room spinning as she contemplated the impossible choice laid before her. She pictured her mother, frail and sick, lying in bed. She saw Jake and Emily, their innocent smiles masking the reality of their situation. Her heart twisted painfully. "Fine," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll think about it." Marvin's relief was palpable, but Sienna felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. This was not the answer she wanted, yet it was the only lifeline she could grasp. As she stood in the doorway watching her uncle leave, she felt as if she was standing on the edge of a precipice, staring into the unknown. That night, Sienna lay in bed, her mind racing. The darkness of her room felt suffocating, the weight of her decision wrapping around her like a shroud. She had always planned to build a life through hard work and perseverance, but now it felt as if the universe was forcing her into a corner. Sleep finally claimed her. Sienna's dreams were filled with images of a future she never wanted, a life dictated by desperation and sacrifice. When morning arrived, she would have to face the reality of what accepting her uncle's proposal could mean, for her, for Alexander, and for her family. Sienna stood in the vast, echoing hallway of Alexander Whitmore's mansion, the late afternoon, sun casting long shadows that danced across the polished marble floor. She felt like a ghost in this grand space, a mere visitor amongst the silent echoes of a life once filled with laughter and warmth. The mansion loomed around her like a fortress, both intimidating and strangely inviting. She glanced at the towering portraits that adorned the walls, each one a reminder of the past that Alexander was trying to escape. As she wandered deeper into the house, she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The weight of Alexander's gaze was palpable, even when he was not in sight. The curiosity mingled with trepidation, a blend of emotions that stirred within her every time she thought of him. She paused in front of a grand piano, its surface gleaming under the sunlight filtering through a nearby window. The keys beckoned to her, and she felt an inexplicable urge to sit and play. Just as she approached the piano, the sound of footsteps broke the silence. Sienna turned, her heart racing as Alexander entered the room. He was dressed in a tailored suit that looked slightly too loose, a testament to the illness that plagued him. His silver hair was neatly combed back, but the weight of his years settled heavily on his shoulders. Yet there was a spark in his eyes, a flicker of intrigue as he watched her. "Do you play?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly, laced with a hint of curiosity. "Not really," she admitted, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I used to take lessons as a child, but I haven't played in years." "Then it's time to start again," he said, stepping closer. "Music has a way of revealing truths. Would you play for me?" Sienna hesitated, feeling the nervous flutter in her stomach. It was an intimate request, one that felt too personal for the nature of their relationship. "I don't know if I remember how," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just let your fingers move," he encouraged, a softness in his demeanor that she had yet to witness. "You'll find the music again." With a deep breath, Sienna sat down at the piano. The coolness of the keys was familiar, yet foreign. She placed her fingers on the white and black keys, hesitating for a moment before beginning to play a simple melody. The notes filled the room, echoing against the walls, and she closed her eyes, allowing herself to be lost in the music. As she played, she felt the tension between them begin to dissolve. She could sense Alexander's presence beside her, his eyes focused intently on her every movement. It was as if the music had created a bridge, connecting their two worlds for just a fleeting moment. When she finished, she looked up, breathless. "I'm sorry if it was terrible." "Not at all," he replied, his expression thoughtful. "It was beautiful. You have a gift, Sienna. You should nurture it." She smiled shyly, feeling a warmth spread through her at his praise. "Thank you. It's been a long time since I've felt that way about music." As days turned into weeks, Sienna found herself spending more time in the music room, often with Alexander nearby. He would sit in a chair, listening intently as she played, sometimes even joining her with a song of his own. Their conversations began to flow more freely, and she learned about his life, the choices he had made, and the regrets that haunted him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow through the windows, Sienna played, a heartfelt piece that seemed to encapsulate all the emotions she had been grappling with since arriving at the mansion. When she finished, she turned to Alexander, who looked visibly moved. "That was profound," he said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "You have a way of expressing what many of us cannot. I think music is the only way I know how to express anything," she confessed, feeling a sudden wave of vulnerability wash over her. "I've always felt like I needed to be strong for my family, to hold everything together, but sometimes it feels impossible." Alexander looked at her with an understanding that made her heart ache. Strength doesn't always mean being unyielding. Sometimes it's about being vulnerable, allowing yourself to feel and to connect with others. You're doing that now. His words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Sienna felt the stirrings of something deeper, something that had begun to blossom amidst the shadows of their circumstances. But just as she was about to respond, the moment was shattered by a sudden crash of thunder outside, startling them both. "Storm's coming," Alexander remarked, standing up. "Let's head to the study. I have something to show you." Curiosity piqued, Sienna followed him through the sprawling corridors until they reached a cozy study lined with bookshelves filled to the brim. A large window overlooked the garden, where rain began to pour in torrents. "Sit," he gestured towards a plush armchair, and she complied, glancing around the room. Alexander moved to a cabinet, retrieving a small framed photograph. He held it out to her. "This was taken long ago, my wife and I, on our wedding day." Sienna took the photo, her eyes widening as she studied the smiling couple. "You were so happy," she observed, feeling a pang of sadness for him. "Yes, but I lost her," he admitted, a shadow crossing his face. "I let my ambitions consume me. I was so focused on building my empire that I forgot to nurture the things that mattered. I'm sorry, she said softly, returning the photograph. It must be difficult to reflect on that. It is, he replied, his voice barely above a whisper. But it also reminds me of the importance of connection. I don't want to leave this world without making amends for my choices. Sienna swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. What do you mean? He took a deep breath, his gaze steady on hers. I've been thinking a lot about legacy. What we leave behind is not just material wealth, but the impact we have on others. I want to ensure that the mansion becomes a place of hope, not just a monument to my success. What do you mean? Sienna asked. I want to transform it into a center for young people, a place where they can learn, grow, and find their own paths, he explained, passion igniting in his eyes. I want to ensure that my fortune serves a greater purpose. Sienna's heart raced at the thought. That's an incredible idea, but why me? Because you have the heart and determination to bring it to life, he said earnestly. I see the potential in you, Sienna. You've already begun to change things for your family. Imagine what you could do for others. She felt a thrill of excitement mixed with fear. But I don't know if I'm ready for something like that. Greatness often comes with uncertainty, he replied. You'll never know what you're capable of until you take that leap. As the storm raged outside, Sienna could feel her walls starting to crumble. Alexander's belief in her was powerful, but it also terrified her. She had spent so long being the one holding everything together. Could she really step into this new role he was suggesting? Let me think about it, she finally said, her voice steadying as she gathered her thoughts. Of course, he replied, a gentle smile gracing his lips. Take your time. Just know that whatever path you choose, you're not alone anymore. His words echoed in her mind as she left the study that night. She stared out at the stormy sky, feeling a tumult of emotions swirling within her. A new chapter was unfolding in her life, one filled with possibility and uncertainty. And amidst the shadows of their peculiar agreement, perhaps she had found something more, an opportunity to embrace her own destiny alongside the man who had changed everything. Sienna stood in the expansive kitchen of Alexander Whitmore's mansion, the aroma of fresh herbs and sautéed vegetables wafting through the air. It had been a week since she had moved in, a week since her life had taken an unimaginable turn. As she stirred the pot on the stove, her thoughts drifted to the stark contrast between her old life and this new one. The weight of responsibility still lingered on her shoulders, yet here she was, cooking in a kitchen that could easily belong to a gourmet restaurant. Do you always spend your time in the kitchen? A voice interrupted her thoughts. Startled, Sienna turned to see Alexander, leaning against the doorframe, a hint of amusement dancing in his eyes. He looked different in the soft light, the lines on his face softened by a moment of levity. I thought you were supposed to be resting, she replied, trying to maintain a playful tone, though her heart raced at his unexpected presence. Resting is overrated, he said, pushing himself off the frame and walking toward her. Besides, I've always found that the best conversations happen in the kitchen. Sienna couldn't help but smile at his straightforwardness. Well, if you're looking for a conversation, you might be disappointed. I'm just here to cook. Cooking is an art, Alexander said, leaning against the counter, and I'd argue that art deserves an audience. Her cheeks flushed slightly at his compliment. I'm not sure if my cooking qualifies as art. Then let me be the judge of that, he said, gesturing toward a chair. I'd be honored to sample your creation. As she plated the food, Sienna felt a sense of nervous excitement. It was strange how much she had come to appreciate these moments with Alexander, despite the circumstances that brought them together. They seemed to inhabit two different worlds, yet here they stood, sharing a meal in the midst of a contract that felt more like a lifeline than a union. Sienna set the plate in front of him, the vibrant colors of the dish contrasting with the polished white of the table. Bon appétit, she said, forcing a lightness into her voice. Alexander picked up his fork and took a bite, chewing thoughtfully. This is surprisingly good, he said, nodding. I didn't expect a medical student to have such culinary skills. She raised an eyebrow. And what exactly did you expect? Perhaps a series of takeout containers and microwave dinners, he teased, a smile breaking through his usually serious demeanor. Sienna couldn't help but laugh, the sound echoing through the vast kitchen. "Well, you're wrong. I can cook. It's just that I usually don't have the time." "Tell me about it," he said, his tone shifting to something more reflective. "Life has a way of eating up time, doesn't it?" "Yes," she replied, her voice softer. "Sometimes it feels like I'm always running, like I'm on a treadmill, just trying to keep up." "Is that how you felt before you came here? Like you were barely keeping your head above water?" Alexander asked, his gaze intense. "Every day," she admitted, leaning against the counter across from him. "I was juggling classes, work, and taking care of my family. I thought I could manage it all, but it was exhausting." "I can relate," he said, his voice dropping slightly, as if sharing a secret. "I spent most of my life building my empire, neglecting the things that truly mattered. I thought money could buy happiness, but it turns out it's just a poor substitute." Sienna felt a pang of empathy toward him. "You've built an empire, but at what cost?" He paused, contemplating her question. "A lot of missed connections, I suppose. I was always focused on the next deal, the next acquisition. I never stopped to appreciate what I had, or who I had around me." "Do you regret it?" she asked, gently, her heart aching for the man who had built such a formidable wall around himself. "Regret is a heavy burden to carry," he said, finally meeting her eyes. "But I prefer to think of it as a lesson learned. I can't change the past, but I can make different choices moving forward." "Like marrying someone you barely know?" Sienna asked, a hint of teasing in her voice. He chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "Exactly. Though I must admit, I didn't expect it to come with such delightful meals." Feeling a rush of warmth at his compliment, Sienna continued to serve him, their conversation flowing easily. They discussed their favorite books, the music they loved, and even the quirks of the mansion. With every shared laugh and story, the walls between them started to crumble, revealing glimpses of the people they truly were, vulnerable, flawed, and searching for connection. Later that evening, as they finished their meal, Sienna reached for the wine bottle. "Would you like a glass?" she asked, unsure if he would indulge. "Why not?" he replied, surprising her once again, a toast to unexpected partnerships. Sienna filled 2 glasses and raised hers. "To unexpected partnerships," she echoed, clinking her glass against his. "May they lead to something more than just a contract." "Amen to that," Alexander said, taking a sip. "Though I must say I never expected to find myself in such a situation. A marriage of convenience with a woman who can cook. Who knows? Maybe this arrangement will turn out to be more beneficial than either of us imagined," Sienna said, her tone light but her heart heavy with the underlying tension of their situation. As they settled into a more relaxed atmosphere, Sienna couldn't shake the feeling that she was beginning to see a different side of Alexander. He wasn't just the cold, calculated businessman she had assumed him to be. There was warmth beneath the surface, a man who yearned for connection just as much as she did. "Tell me, Sienna," he said, breaking the silence. "What are your dreams, beyond this situation we find ourselves in?" She hesitated, unsure of how to express her dreams, a delicate balance of ambition and fear. "I want to be a doctor to help people. I've always believed that medicine is where I can make a difference." "Then why do you hesitate?" he asked, leaning closer. "What's holding you back?" "Life," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've had to prioritize my family and their needs over my own. Sometimes it feels like my dreams are just out of reach." Alexander studied her, his expression softening. "Then let me help you reach them." Sienna's heart raced at his words. "What do you mean?" "I could help you in ways you can't imagine," he said, his tone serious. "If you allow me to invest in your future, I could provide you with the means to pursue your dreams without the weight of responsibility." "Why would you do that?" she asked, taken aback. "You hardly know me." "Because I see potential in you," he said simply. "And for the first time in a long while, I want to contribute to something meaningful." In that moment, Sienna realized that this unexpected partnership might hold the key to something greater than either of them could have foreseen. The shadows of their pasts loomed large, but perhaps together they could begin to carve out a brighter future, one filled with hope, ambition, and the possibility of love. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the mansion, Sienna felt a flicker of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time: hope. Sienna stepped into the familiar confines of her family home, the scent of old wood and aged paper wrapping around her like a comforting blanket. But today that comfort felt hollow. The walls, once filled with laughter and warmth, echoed with the silence of her absence. Walking through the narrow hallway, she could hear the soft murmur of her mother's voice coming from the living room, punctuated by the occasional giggle from her younger siblings. But instead of solace, it only deepened the ache in her chest. After accepting Alexander's proposal, Sienna had felt a surge of hope. The financial stability he provided had lifted a heavy weight off her shoulders, but now that she was back, it felt as though that hope was slipping through her fingers like sand. She dropped her bag by the door and took a deep breath, steeling herself for the inevitable conversation that awaited her. "Hey, Sienna," her younger brother Lucas called out as he bounded into the hallway, his face lighting up with excitement. "You're back. Did you meet any famous people? Did you get to ride in a fancy car?" Sienna knelt down to his level, forcing a smile. "Not this time, buddy. Just a lot of studying and family stuff." Lucas's face fell slightly, but he quickly masked it with a grin. "Well, I'm glad you're home. Mom made your favorite. For dinner." "Thanks, Lucas," she replied, ruffling his hair. As she stood, she caught sight of her mother peeking from the living room, her frail figure illuminated by the soft glow of the lamp. The moment their eyes met, Sienna felt the familiar wave of guilt wash over her. How could she explain her mixed emotions when her mother had fought so hard to keep the family together? "Mum," she called softly, stepping into the living room. The sight of her mother sitting in the armchair, wrapped in a blanket, stirred a tumult of emotions inside her. "How are you feeling today?" "Better, dear. I've been resting," her mother replied, her voice a fragile whisper. "I've missed you. Tell me about your new home." Sienna hesitated, her heart racing. How could she tell her mother about the mansion, about Alexander, without revealing the truth? "It's big and beautiful. I'm getting used to it." Her mother's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "I always dreamed of seeing you in a grand place like that. Do you have everything you need?" "Yeah, Mom, I do." Sienna tried to keep her tone light, but the weight of her secret pressed heavily on her chest. She could feel the tension in the air, the unsaid words hanging like a storm cloud over them. "Good. You deserve nice things, Sienna," her mother said, her voice filled with warmth and pride. "You work so hard for this family. Sometimes I wonder if it's enough," Sienna murmured, her gaze falling to the floor. She felt Lucas watching her, the innocence of his eyes piercing through her turmoil. "Of course it is. You're doing your best, and that's all we can ask for," her mother reassured her, reaching out to squeeze Sienna's hand. "We'll get through this together." As they settled at the dinner table, the atmosphere was filled with laughter and playful banter. Lucas recounted stories from school, while her mother chimed in with tales from her own childhood. Sienna watched them, a bittersweet smile on her face. She couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt, knowing that the financial security they now had was tied to a lie. After dinner, as the dishes were cleared away, Sienna retreated to her room. She sat on her bed, staring at the wall adorned with photographs of happier times. Memories flooded back: family vacations, birthday parties, and lazy Saturdays spent playing board games. The weight of her decision loomed over her like a dark cloud, and she felt the tears welling up in her eyes. Suddenly her phone buzzed, pulling her from her reverie. It was a message from Alexander. She hesitated, then opened it. "Alexander, I hope you're doing well. I've been thinking about you. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything." The message felt like a lifeline, yet it also stirred up the turmoil within her. Could she truly separate herself from the shadows of their arrangement? What did she even want now? With a sigh, she tossed her phone aside and picked up her guitar, strumming absent-mindedly. Music had always been her refuge, the one thing that grounded her. As the notes filled the room, she began to sing softly, pouring her heart into the melody, letting the sadness and confusion find their way into the lyrics. Why does it feel like I'm lost in a dream? Caught between worlds, unraveling at the seams, holding on tight to the past, but it slips away. Can I find a way to be free, to seize the day? She closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. Each note seemed to echo her inner turmoil, a reflection of the battle she faced. Just as she reached the climax of her song, a soft knock at the door interrupted her. "Can I come in?" Lucas asked, peeking his head through the crack. "Of course," Sienna replied, her voice brightening. He entered cautiously, his small figure silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway. "You're really good, Sienna. I love listening to you play." "Thanks, buddy," she said, smiling at him. "What do you want to talk about?" "Do you think you'll stay home for a long time?" he asked, his innocent eyes searching hers. Sienna felt her heart clench. "I'm not sure, Lucas. I have a lot on my plate right now, but I promise I'll always be here for you." "What about Mr. Whitmore? Is he nice?" Lucas asked, tilting his head curiously. Sienna's smile faltered. "He can be complicated, but he's trying to be a good person." Lucas frowned, clearly not understanding. "You should just tell him to be nice. Everyone should be nice." "Yeah, you're right," Sienna chuckled, ruffling his hair again. "It's a little more complicated with grown-ups, though." "Why?" "Because sometimes they have to make hard choices." "Like what?" Sienna sighed, searching for the right words. "Like choosing between what's easy and what's right." Lucas nodded solemnly, processing her words. "I think you're doing the right thing, Sienna. You always do." She felt a swell of pride in her chest, mixed with the weight of her responsibilities. "Thanks, Lucas. That means a lot to me." "Can I help you with something?" he asked. Shifting on his feet, Sienna smiled at his eagerness. "Sure. How about we work on a project for school together?" "Okay," he said, his face lighting up again. "Can we make it about superheroes?" "Absolutely, superheroes it is," Sienna replied, her heart feeling a little lighter. As they gathered supplies from her desk, Sienna couldn't help but reflect on the depth of her brother's simple wisdom. In the innocence of childhood, there was a clarity that often eluded her in the complexities of adulthood. She realized that no matter how tangled her life became, she had a family that loved her, and that love was worth fighting for. Later, that night as she lay in bed, Sienna felt a glimmer of resolve taking root in her heart. She would have to confront Alexander again, but this time it wouldn't just be about the lies. It would be about what she wanted and needed moving forward. The shadows of her past and present may have intertwined, but they wouldn't dictate her future. As sleep began to take her, Sienna whispered to herself, "I will find a way. I will make my own choices." And for the first time in a long while, she felt a spark of hope igniting within her. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue across the expansive garden of Whitmore Manor. Sienna stood by the large oak tree, its branches heavy with years of memories, and watched as Alexander sat on a bench nearby, a fragile figure in a tailored suit that once fit him perfectly. Despite the physical decline that had become evident in recent weeks, there was a light in his eyes, a spark of life that Sienna had grown to cherish. Today was different. It felt like a quiet turning point, a moment teetering on the edge of something significant. "Do you remember the first time we met?" Sienna asked, a tentative smile playing on her lips as she made her way toward him. Alexander looked up, his weathered face breaking into a soft grin. "You were so determined, so unwilling to accept the reality of our situation. I thought you might throw a punch at me for suggesting the marriage." Sienna chuckled, the sound light, and hairy, as if they were sharing a memory from ages past rather than the events of just weeks ago. "I came close, but I think I was too busy panicking about my family's future." He nodded, his gaze drifting toward the horizon. "And here we are, carved from the chaos of that moment." His voice trailed off, leaving a silence heavy with unspoken words. "Do you regret it?" Sienna asked, her heart racing as she braced herself for his response. The question hung in the air, an uninvited guest in their otherwise peaceful conversation. "Regret? No, not in the way you might think," he replied slowly, choosing his words with careful consideration. "I've built a life filled with regrets. But marrying you, that was unexpected. A chance to connect when I thought I was beyond reach." Sienna felt a wave of emotion wash over her, the weight of his words pressing down on her chest. "I never thought I'd find a friend in you, let alone someone who could teach me about living. Even in the midst of all this," she gestured to the garden, "you've shown me that life still exists, even in the shadows." "Sometimes it takes the darkest moments to discover what truly matters," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "You've reminded me of that, Sienna. I never thought I would get a second chance to experience companionship, to share my music, my dreams, and my regrets with someone else." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the rustling leaves and the distant chirping of birds. It felt serene, like the calm before a storm, and Sienna knew that their time together was limited. The reality of his condition loomed over them like a specter, but she didn't want to think about that right now. "Can you play something for me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He looked over at her, surprise flickering across his features. "You want to hear me play?" "Yes," she affirmed, nodding earnestly. "I've seen the way you light up when you're at the piano. I want to hear what's in your heart." Alexander hesitated, his fingers tapping nervously against the bench. "I haven't played in a while. My hands, and they don't listen like they used to." "Please," Sienna urged, her eyes bright with anticipation. "I'd love to hear you. It doesn't matter how long it's been. I just want to experience it with you." With a resigned sigh, he stood up, leaning slightly on the bench for support. "Very well, but don't expect anything extraordinary." He began to walk toward the grand piano located in the expansive music room, a space filled with dust and memories. Sienna followed closely behind, excitement bubbling inside her like a child on Christmas morning. As he settled onto the piano, "Bench!" She took a seat nearby, her heart pounding in her chest. The room was filled with shadows, but the afternoon light spilled through the tall windows, illuminating the keys with a soft glow. Alexander placed his fingers on the keys and hesitated for a moment, his brow furrowing as if he were grappling with an invisible weight. "Just let it flow, Alexander," she encouraged, her voice soothing. "There's no one here but us." With a deep breath, he began to play, a gentle, haunting melody that echoed throughout the room. Sienna closed her eyes, allowing the music to wash over her, each note intertwining with her emotions. It was a piece filled with longing and sorrow, yet it had an undeniable beauty that tugged at her heartstrings. As he played, she watched him closely, noting the way his fingers danced across the keys with a grace that belied his frail body. There was a passion in the way he played, an intensity that spoke volumes about the man he was, hidden beneath the surface of his illness and solitude. When the final note faded into silence, Sienna found herself breathless. "That was beautiful," she managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. "You have such a gift, Alexander." He looked at her, a flicker of vulnerability crossing his features. "Thank you. I didn't play for a long time because I thought music had abandoned me." He paused, his expression shifting. "But you've brought it back to life." Sienna felt a surge of warmth at his words, but it was quickly overshadowed by the weight of reality. "You've shown me so much, but it's time for me to ask you something important," she said, her resolve hardening. "What do you want your legacy to be?" Alexander shifted in his seat, his eyes narrowing as he considered her question. "I've spent my life building an empire, but it's become hollow, just numbers and cold transactions. I want to leave something meaningful behind, something that can breathe life into this place." "Like what?" she prodded gently, sensing the weight of his dreams mingling with his regrets. He took a deep breath, his gaze drifting to the garden outside. "I want this mansion to become a sanctuary for those in need, a center where people can find hope and purpose. I want my fortune to help young minds discover their potential, just as you've discovered yours." Sienna's heart swelled with admiration and sadness at the same time. "You can do that. You can leave a legacy of love and hope." "Will you help me?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, vulnerability etched into every line of his face. "Of course," Sienna replied, her eyes shining with determination. "We can make it happen together. You won't be alone in this. Alexander looked at her, a deep gratitude filling his eyes. Thank you, Sienna. You've ignited a flame within me that I thought had long extinguished. Perhaps together we can create something that outlives us both. As they sat together, plans forming in their minds, Sienna realized that her life was no longer a series of burdens. It was an opportunity, a chance to build something meaningful alongside a man who had become more than just her husband by necessity. In that moment, surrounded by the echoes of their shared dreams, she felt a sense of purpose bloom within her, a promise that neither shadows nor despair would define their paths. And in the heart of that old mansion, they began to weave a new narrative, one of hope, healing, and love that transcended the confines of their circumstance. Sienna stood in the dimly lit music room of the Whitmore mansion, her fingers hovering over the keys of the grand piano. The silence felt heavy, as if the room itself was holding its breath in anticipation of her next move. The last few weeks had been a whirlwind of emotions, and she had spent countless hours reflecting on the whirlwind that her life had become since accepting Alexander's proposal. With each note she played, memories flooded back to her. The warmth of his gaze, the laughter they shared over dinner, and the vulnerable moments they had exchanged in the stillness of the night. It was a melody of their unexpected connection, playing in her heart. Just as she began to press down on the keys, the door creaked open and Alexander stepped inside. He looked frailer than she remembered, but there was a light in his eyes that hadn't dimmed. As he leaned against the doorframe watching her, Sienna felt a familiar warmth spread through her chest. "Didn't know you were here," he said, his voice low and gravelly yet surprisingly gentle. "I needed to practice," she replied, her cheeks tinged with a hint of embarrassment. "It helps me think." "Your playing is beautiful," he said, stepping closer. "It's the first time I've heard you play without the weight of the world on your shoulders." Sienna let out a small laugh, the tension in the room dissipating. "Slightly. Well, I've had a lot on my mind lately. Care to share?" He took a seat on one of the plush chairs, his posture relaxed. She hesitated, her fingers still hovering over the keys. "It's just everything. The decision to come back here to this life. I thought I was free, but now it feels like I'm in limbo." Alexander nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Freedom can be a double-edged sword. You can escape one cage only to find yourself in another." "Exactly," Sienna sighed, finally letting her fingers dance over the keys, filling the room with a haunting melody. "I thought I could just walk away. But that's not how it works, is it? I mean, I still care about you despite everything. I never wanted to manipulate you, Sienna," he said softly, his gaze steady. "I thought I was giving you a way out, a way to help your family without sacrificing your dreams." "But you didn't give me the truth," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "What if I had decided to leave? You would have lost out on the chance to change your life too." "Perhaps, but I've lived my life in fear of the truth. I thought I was protecting you by shielding you from my reality." He paused, looking down at his hands. "I see now that I was only protecting myself." Sienna felt a rush of sympathy wash over her. "You're not alone anymore, Alexander. You have me. We could face this together." He raised his eyes to meet hers, surprise flickering across his features. "Together?" "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "I don't want to be just your wife in a contract. I want to be someone you can rely on, someone who can share this burden with you." A silence enveloped them, the only sound the delicate notes of the piano. Alexander moved to sit beside her, the warmth of his presence sending a shiver down her spine. "You have a beautiful heart, Sienna. I wish I could be the man you deserve." "You are that man," she insisted, her eyes searching his. "You just need to let go of the past. We can create a new future together." He chuckled softly, a sound tinged with disbelief. "You really believe that?" "I do," she replied earnestly. "You've taught me so much already. You've given me hope when I thought it was lost. I want to return the favor." His gaze softened, and for a moment Sienna saw the flicker of the man he used to be, the one who had built an empire but lost sight of what truly mattered. "Hope," he echoed, leaning back slightly. It's a foreign concept for me now. I've spent so long believing it was too late. Then let me show you it's not, Sienna said, her voice steady. Let's build something real. Not just for us, but for others who need it. Others? He asked, intrigued. Yes, your legacy can be more than just money. You can create a place that helps people, that gives them opportunities. She urged, excitement bubbling within her. We can transform this mansion into something meaningful, a center for those who need guidance like I once did. His expression shifted from skepticism to contemplation. You want to turn my home into a refuge? Yes, a place where dreams can be nurtured, where people can find support and community. We could work together to help those who feel lost, just as I did. For a moment, Alexander was silent, his brow furrowed in thought. It's a noble idea, but can it work? Can we really make a difference? Of course we can, Sienna replied, her enthusiasm spilling over. We have the resources, the knowledge, and most importantly, the will to change lives. Imagine the impact we could have. As she spoke, she could see the walls around Alexander beginning to crack. The prospect of a new purpose glimmered in his eyes, and she felt a flicker of determination ignite between them. You're passionate, Sienna, he said finally. I've always admired that about you. But I don't want you to sacrifice your dreams for mine. I'm not sacrificing anything, she insisted, her voice strong. This is my dream too. I want to build a life that means something. I want to make a difference, and I believe we can do it together. He studied her for a long moment, and she could almost see the gears turning in his mind. What if I said yes? What if we really tried to make this happen? A smile broke across her face, and she felt a swell of hope. Then we'll start planning. We'll reach out to the community, find out what they need, and create something beautiful. Together, he repeated, the word hanging in the air like a promise. Yes, together, Sienna echoed, her heart racing at the thought of what lay ahead. And I want it to be a place where you can find healing too, not just for others, but for yourself. He looked away, a shadow passing over his features. I have a long way to go, Sienna. I'm not sure I can be the man you want me to be. You already are, she reassured him. You just have to believe in yourself again. As the sun began to set outside, casting golden hues through the windows of the music room, Alexander took a deep breath. Then let's do it. Let's create something that honors both our pasts and our future. Sienna felt a rush of excitement, and she couldn't help but reach for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. We'll do this together, I promise. In that moment, Sienna knew they were standing at the precipice of something extraordinary, a chance to not only change their own lives, but to impact countless others along the way. With the music of hope playing softly in the background, they sat together, ready to embrace the journey ahead, united by a shared purpose that transcended their pasts. As days turned into weeks, the relationship between Sienna Brooks and Alexander Whitmore shifted into something deeper than either had anticipated. However, the storm that had been brewing since their wedding day was about to break, and secrets would soon unravel. Sienna found herself standing in the grand library of Alexander's mansion, staring at the bookshelves that towered above her, like ancient sentinels guarding the truths of the past. She traced her fingers over the spines of the leather-bound volumes, feeling a disconnect between the opulence surrounding her and the turmoil roiling within. Despite the financial security Alexander had provided, the emotional landscape was fraught with uncertainty. A knock at the door broke her thoughts, and she turned to see Alexander standing there, his frame silhouetted against the light pouring in from the hallway. "May I come in?" he asked, his voice steady, yet tinged with a vulnerability she had not seen before. "Of course," she replied, attempting to mask her apprehension. "I was just lost in thought." He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "You seem distant lately. Is everything all right?" Sienna hesitated, the weight of the revelation she had stumbled upon pressing heavily on her heart. "So I found something today, a medical report." She took a breath, steadying herself. "It said you have years left, Alexander, not months, as you told me." The air thickened with tension, and Alexander's expression shifted from concern to something darker, a shadow passing over his features. "I see," he said quietly. his voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you lie to me?" she demanded, her voice rising slightly. "You made me believe I was marrying you because you were dying. You made me think I was doing this out of necessity, and now I find out it was all a lie." He ran a hand through his thinning hair, visibly, struggling to find the right words. "I didn't mean to deceive you, Sienna. When I was diagnosed, I thought I had only a few months left. I was preparing myself for the end. But when I discovered the truth, I believed it was too late to change anything." "Too late?" she echoed, her heart pounding in her chest. "You think you can just keep lying to me because you're afraid of being alone? You were the one who insisted on this arrangement." "I didn't want you to feel burdened," he replied, raising his hands in frustration. "You were my last hope for something more than just the cold silence of this mansion. I thought if I could give you a future, I could finally feel like I had done something right in my life." Sienna crossed her arms, her heart racing with a mixture of anger and confusion. "What about my future, Alexander? What about the choice I made to enter this marriage? I thought I was sacrificing everything for you and your family, but now it feels like I've been made a fool." "Please," he pleaded, stepping closer, his eyes filled with a desperate intensity. "I never meant for you to feel that way. I've spent decades building an empire, but it's all felt hollow. You've brought light into my life, and I didn't want to lose that." "Light?" Sienna scoffed, her voice shaking with emotion. "I agreed to this because I thought it was a temporary solution, and now that I know I could have walked away at any time, I feel trapped. I thought I was choosing to help my family, but instead, I was just a pawn in your game." Alexander's face fell, the hurt evident in his eyes. "You were never a pawn, Sienna. I was the one who was lost, and you were my salvation. I thought that if I could give you a future, perhaps I could find my own purpose again." "And what purpose is that?" she challenged, stepping back, needing space. "To keep me here under false pretenses? To live out your last days with someone who didn't even know the truth?" He took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging as he accepted the weight of his actions. "You're right. I was selfish. I thought I was giving you a chance, but in reality, I was just trying to escape my own demons. I'm sorry, Sienna." The sincerity in his voice struck her, but the anger and betrayal still burned. "You can't just apologize and expect everything to go back to normal," she said, her voice trembling. "I need time to think." "Time?" he echoed, his brows furrowing. "What does that mean for us? Are you saying you want to leave?" "Don't know what I want," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I need to figure out who I am in all of this. I thought I was here for my family, but now I don't even know if I'm here for you." Silence enveloped them, and Sienna could feel the weight of their choices crashing down like waves against the shore. Alexander looked away, his expression a blend of remorse and resignation. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I could give you something real, but it seems I've only caused you pain. Pain and confusion," she whispered, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "I need to understand my own feelings before I can even think about us." He nodded slowly, as if accepting her words. "I understand. Take the time you need. I'll be here waiting. But know this, Sienna, you've changed me. You've shown me that there's more to life than wealth and power. I don't want to lose you." As she turned to leave, the ache in her heart felt insurmountable. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Alexander," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I need to find myself first." Stepping out of the library, Sienna felt a rush of emotions swirling within her: anger, confusion, sadness, and an unexpectedly flickering hope. She closed the door behind her, leaning against it as she took a moment to breathe, feeling the weight of the world pressing down upon her shoulders. The vastness of the mansion felt even more oppressive, now each room filled with echoes of silence, where laughter and music once resided. Sienna wandered through the hallways, her mind racing as she grappled with the implications of Alexander's confession. He had built walls around himself, fortifications against the world, and yet she had somehow managed to breach them, only to find the truth lurking behind. As she stepped into the music room, the grand piano sat quietly, an unplayed melody lingering in the air. Sienna approached the instrument, her fingers brushing over the keys, and she felt a spark of inspiration. Perhaps music was the key to unlocking her own emotions. a way to channel the turmoil within and express the complexity of her feelings. With a deep breath, she sat down and began to play, letting the notes flow freely from her fingertips. The melody echoed through the empty room, filling the silence with a haunting beauty that resonated deep within her soul. Each chord rang out like a heartbeat, a reflection of the struggle between love and betrayal, hope and despair. As the music enveloped her, Sienna lost herself in the moment, allowing the emotions to pour out. She played for her family, for the burdens she carried. She played for Alexander, for the man who had brought both light and darkness into her life. The duality of their relationship seemed to take form in the music, each note telling a story of longing, confusion, and the search for truth. Finally, as the last notes faded into silence, Sienna felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She could no longer ignore the complexity of her feelings for Alexander. Yes, he had lied, but he had also shown her a glimpse of something beautiful, a chance for redemption, for connection, and for love. Wiping away the tears that had fallen, during her performance, Sienna stood up, feeling a flicker of determination igniting within her. She wouldn't allow herself to be merely a pawn in Alexander's life or her own. She would confront her own emotions, confront him, and find a way to navigate this unexpected journey they had embarked upon together. As she left the music room, Sienna felt a renewed sense of purpose. She would take the time she needed, but she would not shy away from the truth. The shadows of their past might linger, but she was ready to step into the light and discover what lay ahead, both for herself and for the man who had turned her world upside down. Sienna stood at the open window of her modest room, the pale morning light spilling in and illuminating the clutter of books and notes strewn across her desk. The familiar sounds of her neighborhood drifted in, a symphony of children laughing and the distant hum of cars. Yet today, it all felt muted, overshadowed by the weight of her thoughts. She had spent the past few days grappling with the aftermath of her confrontation with Alexander. The revelation of his deception loomed over her like a storm cloud, dark and oppressive. How could he have lied to her? The warmth of the sun contrasted sharply with the chill in her heart. She wrapped her arms around herself, seeking comfort in the fabric of her worn sweater. She had returned to her family's apartment after leaving the mansion, yet the sense of belonging she once felt had shifted. The money that Alexander had provided ensured her family was safe for now, but her heart was anything but settled. She felt misplaced, a wanderer in her own life. As she prepared for another day of classes, Sienna's mind replayed the moments they had shared. The laughter, the music, the late-night talks that had peeled back the layers of Alexander's guarded exterior. He had been more than a cold billionaire. He had become a confidant, a mentor, and perhaps in a way she hadn't been prepared for, a friend. She shook her head, trying to dispel the thoughts that threatened to consume her. She needed to focus on her studies, her future, not the man who had turned her world upside down. Later that afternoon, Sienna sat in the student lounge, surrounded by the chatter of her classmates, but feeling utterly alone. She pushed her lunch, around her plate lost in thought. Just then, her phone buzzed on the table, breaking her reverie. It was a message from an unknown number. Hesitating, she opened it. "Dear Sienna, it's Alexander. I hope you are well. I wrote you a letter. Please meet me at the old oak tree by the park at 3 p.m. I would like to talk." Her heart raced. A part of her wanted to ignore the message, to continue living her life without the complications he brought. But another part, the part that had spent countless hours in his company, craved closure, understanding. With a deep breath, she decided to go. The park was alive with the colors of autumn, leaves swirling down like confetti. Sienna spotted the old oak tree, its branches stretching wide, casting long shadows on the ground. Alexander stood beneath it, his silhouette framed by the golden light of the setting sun. He looked older, more fragile, but there was a warmth in his eyes that made her heart flutter, an unfamiliar mix of anger and longing. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. "I know this isn't easy for you." Sienna took a deep breath, fighting the urge to turn away. "You shouldn't have lied to me, Alexander. It feels like everything we built was based on a lie." He nodded, Guilt etched across his features. "You're right. I should have been honest from the start. But I was so afraid of losing you, of losing the light you brought into my life." "Light?" Sienna scoffed, crossing her arms. "I was just a means to an end, a way for you to feel less lonely in your final days." "No," he said, stepping closer. "You were never just that. You have to understand. I thought I had months left. I was trapped in my own darkness, convinced. I had nothing to give, nothing to live for. But you showed me the beauty of life again." Sienna's heart softened, just a fraction. "But it was all based on a lie. How can I trust anything you say now?" "Because I'm asking you to," he replied, his voice earnest. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want to share my truth now. I've made mistakes, so many mistakes. But you've changed me, Sienna. You've given me something to fight. For Saint-Domingue, fight for?" she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" "I have years, Sienna, years that I thought I would spend in misery. But now, after meeting you, I want to leave a legacy. I want to do something meaningful with my life before it's too late." Sienna felt a swell of confusion and hope. "What kind of legacy?" "I want to transform my mansion into a center for young people like you, those who need support and guidance, a place where dreams can flourish." He paused, searching her face. "I want you to help me with this. I want you to be a part of it." She shook her head, overwhelmed. "You want me to help you after everything? After the way you deceived me?" "That's not all I want, Sienna. I want you to be happy. I want you to live your dreams, whatever that may look like. I want to help you achieve your goals." His sincerity hung in the air, heavy yet hopeful. Sienna felt her defenses begin to crumble. "And if I say no?" he sighed, looking away at the leaves falling around them. "Then I will respect your decision, but I hope you'll reconsider. I wish for nothing more than to make amends and to make a difference." For a moment they stood in silence, the world around them fading as she considered his words. Sienna had spent so long fighting for her family, for her dreams, and yet here was a man offering a new path, one that intertwined their lives in a way she never expected. "What if I don't know how to help you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Then we'll figure it out together," he replied, a hint of a smile breaking through the tension. "You have a gift, Sienna. You inspire others, without even trying. I believe in you." Sienna felt a warmth bloom in her chest, a flicker of the connection they had shared. "What if I change my mind again?" "Then we'll adapt. Life is about choices, and I want you to choose freely." The words settled in her mind, stirring a sense of possibility she hadn't felt since she arrived back home. Perhaps this wasn't just about his redemption. It could be about hers, too. The weight of her family's struggles, the fear of her own future. It all seemed a little lighter at that moment. "Okay," she said, her voice steady now. "I'll think about it." Alexander's face lit up with a mix of relief and gratitude. "Thank you, Sienna. That's all I ask." As they stood under the sprawling branches of the oak tree, Sienna realized that their journey was far from over. The shadows of their past would always linger, but perhaps, together, they could carve out a new path, one filled with hope, purpose and the promise of a brighter future. In the grand expanse of Alexander Whitmore's mansion, the air was heavy with unspoken words and the distant echoes of a life filled with both ambition and solitude. Sienna stood by the large window in the music room, her fingers lightly grazing the polished surface of the grand piano. The early evening sun filtered through the sheer curtains, casting a warm glow that danced across the room and highlighted the dust motes swirling in the air. She felt an inexplicable heaviness in her chest, a mixture of longing and uncertainty that had become all too familiar since her arrival. It had been weeks since she had accepted the marriage proposal that had seemed so far-fetched, and yet here. She was tied to a man she was still getting to know, a man who came with a lifetime of regrets and secrets. As she glanced at the piano, she recalled the first time she had played here, the soft melody drawing Alexander from the shadows of his loneliness. It was a moment that had marked a shift in their relationship, a thread of connection that had begun to weave itself between them. Just then, the door creaked open, and Alexander stepped into the room, looking more frail than she remembered. His Once commanding presence was now softened by the toll of his illness. The lines on his face were deepening, shadows under his eyes hinting at sleepless nights and burdens carried alone. Yet there was a light in his gaze that hadn't been there before. A flicker of hope, perhaps, ignited by their shared moments. "Ah, I see you've found your sanctuary," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to reverberate within the walls. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, observing her with a mixture of admiration and something deeper that she couldn't quite place. Sienna turned to him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I was just thinking about how quiet it is here. It's peaceful." She paused, searching for the right words. "It feels different than the rest of the house, like it holds memories." Alexander nodded slowly, stepping further into the room. "It does. This piano has seen many seasons of my life. It was my escape when the world felt too heavy, a place where I could express what I couldn't put into words." He approached the instrument, running his fingers over the keys, as if recalling melodies from a distant past. "Can you still play?" Sienna asked, curiosity bubbling to the surface. A flicker of mischief crossed Alexander's face, surprising her. "Not as well as I once could, but I still know a few tunes." He paused, then added, "Would you like me to play something for you?" Caught off guard, Sienna's heart raced. "I'd love that," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander moved to sit on the stool, his posture straightening as he took a moment to gather his thoughts. The atmosphere shifted as he began to play, the soft notes drifting through the room like a gentle breeze. The melody was wistful, filled with both longing and nostalgia, and Sienna found herself closing her eyes, allowing the music to wash over her. As the last note faded, she opened her eyes to find Alexander watching her intently. "What did you think?" he asked, his tone playful yet serious. "It was beautiful," she breathed, still caught in the spell of the moment. "It's like you poured your heart into it." A shadow crossed his face, and he looked away. The vulnerability of the moment fleeting. "Music has always been a part of me, but it's also a reminder of what I've lost." He paused, then added, "I let my life become too consumed by work and ambition. I forgot to cherish the small moments." Sienna felt a pang of empathy. "You're not alone in that. I think we all get caught up in what we think we need to do, sometimes at the expense of what really matters." She took a step closer, her heart aching for the man who sat before her, burdened by the weight of his choices. He looked up at her, his expression softening. "You have a wisdom that belies your years, Sienna. It's refreshing." "Thank you," she said, her cheeks warming under his gaze. "I've had to grow up quickly, but I'm still learning. Every day is a lesson." Alexander nodded, a flicker of respect in his eyes. "And you're teaching me as well. I didn't expect to find someone like you in my life. It's unexpected." Sienna felt a rush of hope at his words. Perhaps there was something genuine forming between them, something that transcended the circumstances that had brought them together. "I didn't expect any of this either," she admitted, "but I'm starting to appreciate the moments we have, however unconventional they may be." He smiled, a rare warmth lighting up his features. "Perhaps that's what life truly is, finding beauty in the unexpected." Their eyes locked, and in that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. It was as if they were both grappling with the enormity of their situation, but finding solace in each other's presence. Sienna hesitated, then took a leap of faith. "Can I ask you something, Alexander? Something I've been thinking about for a while now?" "Of course," he replied, his expression curious. "What do you want your legacy to be? When all is said and done, how do you want to be remembered?" He leaned back slightly, considering her question. "I've spent so much time building an empire that I lost sight of what truly matters. I want to be remembered not for my wealth, but for the lives I impacted. I want to leave something behind that can help others, something that can give hope." Sienna felt a spark igniting within her. "You can do that, you know. Even now. You have the resources to make a difference." His eyes softened as he regarded her. "And what about you, Sienna? What do you want your legacy to be?" She pondered for a moment, her heart racing. I want to help others too. I want to be a doctor, to make a difference in people's lives. But I also want to live a life that's true to me, filled with love and connection, not just duty. You will, he said firmly. You have the strength within you to achieve anything you desire. As they shared this moment of vulnerability, Sienna felt the barriers between them begin to dissolve. She realized that Alexander was not just a man caught in the shadows of his past. He was a source of inspiration, a mentor who could help her realize her dreams. "Thank you for believing in me," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He smiled, the warmth in his eyes deepening. "You're worth believing in, Sienna. More than you know." The weight of their conversation hung in the air, charged with unspoken feelings. Sienna felt her heart race, the connection between them growing stronger with each passing moment. They were two souls navigating the complexities of life together, bound by circumstance, yet drawn together by something much deeper. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the room in shades of gold and amber, Sienna knew that their journey was just beginning. And no matter how it unfolded, she felt a sense of peace knowing that they were no longer alone in their struggles. They were partners in a dance of healing, each step bringing them closer to understanding not only each other, but themselves as well. Sienna stood in the grand garden of the Whitmore estate, the late afternoon sun casting a warm golden hue over the meticulously trimmed hedges and vibrant flower beds. It was a peaceful afternoon, the kind that made her forget the turmoil of her recent past, yet the gentle breeze couldn't quite sweep away the weight in her heart, the remnants of betrayal lurking just beneath the surface. She gazed at the fountain, its water dancing gracefully in the air, sparkling like diamonds in the sunlight. It was a picturesque scene, one that could easily be mistaken for a painting, but as beautiful as it was, Sienna felt a void within her, a disconnect that had taken root ever since she discovered Alexander's deception. The thought of him lying to her about his health gnawed at her insides, like a persistent ache that refused to fade. "Sienna," a familiar voice broke her reverie. She turned to see Alexander approaching, his silhouette framed by the sun, casting a long shadow across the manicured lawn. He wore a simple white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and his dark trousers complemented his lean frame. He looked weary but determined, a man who had faced the spectre of death and emerged, if not unscathed, at least resolute. "Alexander," she replied, her voice soft, as if she were afraid to disturb the fragile. "Peace hanging in the air, can we talk?" he asked, his tone earnest, almost pleading. Sienna hesitated, weighing the choice in her mind. They had so much to discuss, yet she felt the distance between them like an invisible wall. I don't know if we should," she finally said, her heart racing. "Please," he urged, stepping closer, his eyes searching hers. "I need you to hear me out." With a reluctant nod, she motioned for him to sit on a nearby bench. The garden was alive with the sounds of chirping birds and the rustling of leaves, yet all she could focus on was the man who had turned her life upside down. Alexander took a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts, and finally spoke. "I want to start by apologizing. I never meant to deceive you, Sienna. Not really." "Not really," she echoed, incredulous. "You told me you were dying. You made me believe that I was making a choice to spend my last days with you, and now I find out that you were lying. How can you call that anything other than deception?" His expression hardened for a moment, but then softened as he continued.